This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. The Department of Defense is working with Google to help secure America's digital defense systems, from establishing cloud-based zero-trust solutions to deploying the latest AI technology. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American innovation.
So, Ian, how long has the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, been trying to block Planned Parenthood from receiving funding?
Quite a while now. I believe since 2018.
Ian Millhiser reports on courts and the law over at Vox. And before we got into Governor McMaster's bid to ban Medicaid recipients from going to Planned Parenthood, Ian wanted to make one thing very clear.
It is not something he is allowed to do. There is a federal law that says that if you are a Medicaid recipient, then you're allowed to choose your own doctor. And McMaster is claiming that he has the power to cut off Medicaid funds to Planned Parenthood. And again, that's just not something that he can do.
But that has not stopped South Carolina from trying. And this week, at long last, the Supreme Court is going to consider whether South Carolina is right.
This case that is now before the Supreme Court, it's called Medina v. Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, has been through a number of twists and turns. It's gone up to the Fourth Circuit, which is the intermediate appeals court that hears cases out of South Carolina at least 2 or 3 times now. The Fourth Circuit keeps saying, nope, you can't do it. The statute says what it says. Sometimes the Supreme Court has looked at it and looked at it briefly and said, hey, Fourth Circuit, could you look at that again? And the Fourth Circuit looked at it again and said, yep, still can't do it.
Sounds like this case is like a real tribute to the value of just hanging in there.
It is.
You know, I looked up video from a South Carolina gubernatorial debate back in 2018, and it was a little like going back to a more innocent time. The Democratic nominee just tears into the governor.
Henry, this is quite possibly one of the most despicable acts you've done in office. The fact is, the veto and the executive order that you issued was a pure political stunt that put at risk the health of thousands of South Carolina women who frankly don't deserve the way you have treated them. The reality is, and you know,
like he talks about defunding Planned Parenthood as being one of the most despicable things he's done while in office.
And Henry, I will always side with the people of South Carolina and not play politics with their lives.
He said this is a political stunt. And he ends by saying, your actions won't hold water. This won't survive in court. 6 or 7 years later, it's such a different world. Are you as confident that the Supreme Court is not going to let South Carolina get away with this?
The justices are really going to have to stretch if they want to uphold what South Carolina is doing. The law says that any individual, I'm just reading the text of federal law here, any individual eligible for medical assistance may obtain that care from any institution, agency, community pharmacy, or person qualified to perform the service or services required.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, but I am never confident when it comes to the Supreme Court. I mean, after the court said that Donald Trump is allowed to do crimes, I don't trust them to do anything, to get anything right.
Today on the show, the Supreme Court considers an abortion case. that turns out to be so much more than an abortion case. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is a great way to discover the best new styles and elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. The great thing about Saks.com is that it is always open 24 hours a day, which means you can browse from the comfort of your own home. Saks makes it really easy to find your favorite brands, and they offer amazing style inspiration. I'm not exaggerating when I say my jaw dropped at the shearling leather biker jacket I found, and that's not even mentioning the Alice and Olivia sequined mini dress I had my eye on. Whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and you want to elevate your personal style, head on over to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is a great way to discover the best new styles and elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. The great thing about Saks.com is that it is always open 24 hours a day, which means you can browse from the comfort of your own home. Saks makes it really easy to find your favorite brands, and they offer amazing style inspiration. I'm not exaggerating when I say my jaw dropped at the shearling leather biker jacket I found, and that's not even mentioning the Alice and Olivia sequined mini dress I had my eye on. Whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and you want to elevate your personal style, head on over to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration. So just to reiterate, federal law says that patients who are on Medicaid have the right to choose any medical provider they want, as long as that person is qualified. But in 2018, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster basically ignored the law and issued an executive order that said that Medicaid could no longer cover services at Planned Parenthood, at least not in his state. To be clear, federal law already prohibits Medicaid from covering abortion in most cases. So this order, it wasn't targeted at abortion. It was targeted at all the other healthcare services Planned Parenthood provides.
And the way that he tried to do this is by mucking around with that word qualified. He said that, well, the state says that if you perform abortions, you're not qualified. And so that's it. The state basically claims that it has the right to define what the word qualified means. That's not what the word has ever meant. And so unless South Carolina has evidence that Planned Parenthood's health providers can't do their job right, it should not have a legal basis to stand on here.
Doesn't South Carolina have an abortion ban at 6 weeks?
At 6 weeks, yes. But I mean, there are still some abortions going on in South Carolina up to that 6-week mark.
And as McMaster basically said, listen, stop performing abortions and we're all good.
That is what the state's brief says in this case. The state's brief says explicitly, if Planned Parenthood decides to stop providing abortion, then they can get the Medicaid funds back. So the state is admitting it is not doing this because of any concerns that the physicians are unqualified. It's just that they don't like this other work they do, which again is not funded by Medicaid, is not funded by the state.
And the other work they do, the stuff that the state doesn't want to fund, is really basic, right? It's well women care, it's birth control, that sort of thing. That's what the state wants to defund here.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, Planned Parenthood doesn't just do abortions. They do a full suite of women's reproductive health care. Some Planned Parenthood clinics might provide other, primary care or other treatments. But, Planned Parenthood is not simply in the business of abortions. And what the state is trying to cut off here is not their abortion work. What the state is trying to cut off here is their ability to get paid for things, again, like pap smears or birth control.
As you said, it seems straightforward that this executive order from South Carolina was not legal. But it also seems like the federal government could have stepped in here in some way, right? Like between when this executive order was signed and now, there was a whole Biden administration. They could have stepped in and clarified like what Medicaid covers and it doesn't, right?
So the federal government technically has the power to enforce Medicaid law, but the way that it has to enforce it only makes things worse. So if a state violates Medicaid law, the recourse that the federal government can use is it can cut off Medicaid funding to the state. So the Biden administration totally could have said to South Carolina, yeah, you're not in compliance with Medicaid law, so we're going to cut off your funding. But like the federal government almost never uses that power. I'm not aware of a single instance where they've used it.
Because it's punishing the people of the state.
Exactly. Like, if your goal is to make sure that Medicaid patients in South Carolina are able to get the care they seek at Planned Parenthood or whatever doctor they choose, you are acting counter to that goal. If you defund Medicaid, you're making things worse if you defund Medicaid.
So the only other course of action was to sue, which Planned Parenthood and one of their patients did. And that lawsuit eventually worked its way up to the Supreme Court. But the question the court's going to be deciding on isn't actually whether or not South Carolina broke the law. The answer to that is pretty clear. The question before the court today is whether or not South Carolina can be sued for breaking the law.
The question in this Medina case before the Supreme Court is whether anyone is allowed to sue to enforce this law. I can get into the technical reasons why this is, but what the Supreme Court has said is that not all provisions of Medicaid law are enforceable through private lawsuits. So not every time the Medicaid statute says that a state has to do something is a private citizen allowed to file a lawsuit. What the Supreme Court has said is that the law itself has to refer to the people who benefit from the law in order for individuals to be able to sue.
Okay, I'm getting confused. So I feel like if I'm a consumer of Medicaid, I'm a patient, right? Shouldn't I have some redress if I have a question about what my coverage is there for?
You would think that would be the case. And there was a time in the Supreme Court's history where they tended to follow the rule where there's a right, there's a remedy. If there's a law protecting something, then you should be able to file a lawsuit in order to enforce your rights under that law. That is no longer entirely how it works. So you have to, in order to determine whether a specific law can be enforced through lawsuits, read the law and see if that law refers to the people who benefit from it. That's what the Supreme Court has said.
Does the law do that here?
Yes, it does. So I will read the relevant provisions of the law. It says a state provision for medical assistance must provide that any individual for medical assistance may obtain such assistance. So,
okay, that's me. I'm the person getting the care.
Exactly right.
What I'm hearing here is like the basic question the basic question at issue here about whether Medicaid should cover these services. There's kind of no argument that Medicaid shouldn't.
That's right.
But now also we're asking a different question about whether the law says I can sue as a consumer of Medicaid. Also, it seems like, yes, I can. So basically, the Supreme Court is considering all of these questions when there aren't really questions there.
That's right. And if this wasn't an abortion case, I don't think there's any chance this would be before the Supreme Court. So there is a bit of history here. There's two useful pieces of history. The first is that a lot of states, a lot of red states have tried to cut off funding for Planned Parenthood. Almost every single federal court who has looked at this question has said, nope. The law says that patients get to choose who their health provider is. The law refers to individuals eligible for medical assistance. That meets the Supreme Court's test for private suits. What the state is doing here is not allowed. There are two courts, however, the Fifth and the Eighth Circuit,
These are the conservative courts.
Yeah. These are like, I mean, the Fifth Circuit in particular, there's no such thing as law in the Fifth Circuit. It's just, the majority of the judges on the Fifth Circuit just do whatever MAGA wants.
I would push back here, but I really can't.
It is a really super duper right-wing court. So that's one useful bit of history, that you have these two outlier right-wing courts who, despite the fact that the law is very clear here, have decided that they want to spite abortion providers anyway. The other piece of history that's useful here is that after those two courts ruled, the Supreme Court in 2023 issued an opinion called Tlevsky. And Tlevsky basically reaffirmed everything I've said about the Medicaid statute.
So if the court is pretty settled here in how it thinks about this case, in your mind, why has it agreed to take this South Carolina case up?
So the simplest answer to that, the most optimistic answer, is that the Supreme Court almost or very frequently takes cases when there's what's called a circuit split, which means that two different federal courts of appeals disagree on the right answer to a question. And, even though the Fifth and the Eighth Circuit are clearly wrong, their decisions, like they haven't repudiated their decisions, those decisions haven't been reversed yet. They are still on the books.
So they took it up to spank the lower courts and be like, guys, stop it.
And that's what I hope happened here. But this is an abortion case. And, we can't trust these guys. These guys said that Donald Trump's allowed to do crimes. These guys have said things in the abortion context. Remember when they upheld Texas's bounty hunter law, SB 8, the law which said that so long as the state uses bounty hunters, it can neutralize entire constitutional rights. Remember that decision? The Supreme Court has a history of saying ridiculous things when the politics of the case are strong enough.
They see abortion and their brains get scrambled.
That is my fear.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Lowe's knows how to help pros save. That's why the new MyLowe's Pro Rewards program lets you unlock exclusive member deals on the things you need every day on the job. Plus, MyLowe's Pro Rewards members can get volume discounts on eligible orders through a quote of $2,000 or more. Join for free today. Lowe's, we help, you save. Exclusions, more terms and restrictions apply. Program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
One of the things about this case that's surprising, I think, is who is arguing it. South Carolina hired lawyers from the Alliance Defending Freedom to represent them at the Supreme Court. Can you just explain what this group is and why that's notable?
Yeah, it's a strange choice. So the Alliance Defending Freedom they're basically the biggest law firm representing conservative evangelical causes. They bring a lot of anti-abortion cases. They bring a lot of what they style as religious liberty cases, where the liberty that the person is seeking is the liberty to ignore an anti-discrimination law that prohibits discrimination against gay or trans people.
This case would traditionally be argued by what? The Attorney General of South Carolina?
Yeah, normally you'd expect, the Attorney General has their own team of lawyers. Normally you would expect someone who works for the Attorney General's office to represent the state. I don't know why the state decided to hire ADF here. Maybe they did so because ADF has a lot of experience bringing anti-abortion lawsuits. And so they figured like maybe these guys will help us out here because they have a lot of experience in this area. But like they don't have a lot of successful experience in this area. I mean, the most famous anti-abortion case is this lawsuit that ADF brought trying to ban the anti-abortion drug mifepristone. It went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against ADF. Even Alito was like, dude, you went too far here.
Well, and to me, I look at it and I think it's a weird alliance between a pretty religious organization and a very conservative organization and a state actor. Like I couldn't imagine Letitia James in New York saying, well, the ACLU will be arguing this for us,
Right. And one reason I can't imagine that is because I assume that Letitia James trusts her own lawyers. She can hire them. And so like there's no reason to go get an outside counsel here. The main thing that puzzles me about it is like I've covered a lot of cases that ADF has litigated. I don't think their lawyers are particularly good. Like they lost the mifepristone case 9-0. I have a lot of confidence in the professional competence of lawyers who work in state AG offices. I think the sort of lawyers who would go work for the state of South Carolina are probably pretty good lawyers. And I don't understand why you would pass them over in favor of this organization that doesn't always do as good of a job as it could.
Can we talk about what this case means for Planned Parenthood as an organization? It really seems like they're pretty bedraggled at this point.
Yeah. I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, it's just under 80 million Americans are on Medicaid. So that means that about a quarter of all patients in the United States are on Medicaid. And so if Planned Parenthood loses a quarter of its patients, a quarter of its non-abortion patients, that's a serious blow. I mean, no one wants to lose a quarter of their customers, a quarter of their revenue. It's going to seriously diminish their ability to function.
And yet wildly in South Carolina, where this whole case is taking place, my understanding is that Planned Parenthood clinics receive less than 0.1% of state Medicaid dollars. So while the greater organization relies on Medicaid a lot, in South Carolina, which is bringing this suit, it's like they're basically just trying to like rip little coins under the couch cushions away from Planned Parenthood.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of like Doge, where like you have this line item on the state or, in Doge's case, the federal budget that Republicans don't like, but it's just not that much.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me as I was doing some research into the story was actually listening to the doctors who worked at Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. And they just had really concrete stories about the fact that, for instance, listen, what I do day in and day out is place IUDs, for instance. And we know that if patients can't go here where I can see them same day, they're going to be waiting 3 months to get care somewhere else. And we know that because our patients have told us. And so there really is a concrete harm here to taking away the funding.
Right. Yeah. Like the impact on the state here is you're just diminishing healthcare capacity. You're just going to have fewer working gynecologists in the state. Planned Parenthood is saying, hey, we've got all of these doctors, these nurse practitioners, these people who are competent to provide this kind of care that women wait a really long time to get. And like, we want to make it easier for them to get it. And the state is saying no.
I think the other thing that really strikes me about this case is the fact that it's getting teed up at this time when it really seems to resonate with what's happening in Washington with Donald Trump, by which I mean the case is really at its heart about the government's ability to defund institutions it doesn't like.
Yeah.
And we can see how Trump's administration is doing that in all kinds of ways. And then the thing that this case is going to decide is about individuals' rights to use the courts to petition for services they think they're entitled to. And that strikes me because right now, the only recourse that people who feel like they're being harmed by the Trump administration have is the courts. Like, Congress is not functioning for them in any kind of way. The courts are really out there on a limb, being the only place that's like preventing you from losing your job or whatever. Does that strike you too, that this case just like touches on all these very current issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's almost an autocratic playbook. I mean, you might remember before the October 7 attack in Israel scrambled the politics of that nation. Prime Minister Netanyahu was trying to consolidate power. And so the thing that he decided to do was to pass a law that would severely weaken the Israeli court system and weaken its ability to, make his government comply with the law. And there were mass protests. There were such widespread protests that Netanyahu had to back down. I mean, this is something we see in country after country. There was turned out to be unsuccessful, but there was an attempt to do it in Poland. We've seen it in Hungary. When you have an autocratic, sliding away from democracy in a nation, you got to control the courts, because the courts are the entity that actually applies the laws to individuals. If there's an individual person who says that the government is violating the law against them, it's not like the government just automatically complies. You get a court order to make the government comply. And so the question that we're going to find out the answer to right now is whether the Supreme Court, with its 6-3 majority, the 6-3 Republican majority, is just going to rubber stamp everything that Donald Trump does. And then bear in mind that Donald Trump gets 4 years to appoint judges. So things are only going to get worse. And even if the courts hold the line right now, we don't know how bad the courts are going to be, 3 or 4 years from now.
So oral arguments are happening today. What are you going to be watching for? Who are you going to be watching?
Well, in any Supreme Court argument, you watch Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Now, in the Tlebsky case that I mentioned earlier, which reaffirmed the longstanding rule regarding when you can sue under Medicaid law, that was a 7-2 decision. Thomas and Alito dissented. I assume they're dead to us. Like, if every justice does what they did in Tlebsky, this will be a 7-2 decision. But it's, Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. They're very, very conservative judges, but they have showed more of an ability than, say, Sam Alito to distinguish between what the law says and what they wish that the law says.
I guess the thing to watch for with these justices is almost how much they want to preserve their own power, because they have shown an interest in that in the past, making sure that they can weigh in. And part of what this case does is it prevents cases. If they ruled to let the defunding go through, it would mean fewer cases coming to them because plaintiffs wouldn't be able to bring them.
I mean, if greed and covetousness of their own authority is the thing that gets them to do the right thing here, fine. I'm not gonna. I am outside of the businesses of probing the dark reaches of Brett Kavanaugh's brain. For whatever reason he wants to do the right thing, I'll accept it.
Ian Millhiser, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Ian Millhiser is a senior correspondent at Vox. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.